Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in with Four at the Table. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The ladies are not here today. I'm solo, but they'll be back next week. Today, I have a very special guest. We're going to talk about Until the Lion Speaks by Billy Moore. And I have Billy Moore here today to talk about his wonderful book. How you doing today, Billy?
I'm good.
Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Billy is a friend of mine, and he happened to write a book on his life. And the book is very emotional. It can make you cry, can make you smile, and it also can make you probably upset with some of the things that's in here. I'm going to touch on some of the things that interest me the most, that I wanted to bring to the table and discuss with him on today.
All right.
So, Billy, you grew up in Abergression, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
85th and Bishop, Foster Park.
Can you share what that was like in your time of growing up? Was it like in the 80s, right?
Yeah, I grew up, I'm an 80s kid, but my grandparents, they moved from the low end, 44th and Lake Park, Oakenwall, to 85th and Bishop in 1968. I think I was like 6 months old when my grandparents brought that house. And it was still very much a white community. I think around the time that I ended up maybe in 5th grade, the whole community was black. But when they initially moved over there, they wasn't allowed to go west of Ashland. So it was still very much a segregated community in terms of the racial boundaries. And it's funny growing up, thinking about how being a kid, you just love to do the things you did. I grew up right next to a park, Foster Park. I got into playing sports. Baseball especially was a sport that interested me because of my father, who grew up playing baseball, and his oldest brother, Lawrence, he played in the Negro Leagues for the Kansas City Monarchs. So that was just something that was passed down to me. And, you know, the community, although it had integrated, or pretty much became predominantly black, it still became segregated. Because of the Chicago institution of street organizations. So you still had to be mindful of where you was traveling. And I think at a certain point in my life, you know, I also got influenced by that culture in Chicago, maybe around the time when I was 13, 14.
So let me ask you this. You played baseball. You actually had a love for it.
Yes, I do.
Okay. What is your definition of love?
My definition of love has, for me, a multitude of meanings, because you can have love for different things. You can love your wife, you can have a love for your kids that may be different than the love for people in general. And you can love friends. You know, it can very much be an emotional content that you feel, you know, people that's close to you, that's very intimate, but you can also just have empathy. And I think love is the highest definition of empathy. When you can see the common relative thing that you know is within you is in other people. You don't overlook that. You have a consciousness, and basically, you know, you want to see the best. So I think that's the spirit of love, just having, you know, a real positive, empathetic attitude about people, you know. But love could be experienced in many different ways. You know?
But you were, you know, you were brought up in love. You had your father and your father was your mother and your father were married, but they eventually separated. He wasn't in the household, right? Okay.
Yeah. You know, that's. You know, unfortunately, we grow up a lot without fathers in the household, but I didn't miss his presence. I'm sure had he been in the household, there's a lot of gaps that I was able to, you know, exploit just having a mother. You know, she was basically working to support me. I was, you know, the extended family was strong, especially back then. because my mother was 16 when she had me.
And you were her only child.
Exactly.
Okay.
I was my mother's only child. So, you know, I had the love of my grandparents, and I was raised in their house while my mother still went to school. She started working, you know, and as I got a little older in my teenage years, you know, I would see my father. He was very present, but him not being in the household, I was able to do things that had that supervision from him being right there present. Of course, I wouldn't have been able to do.
Right. I think kids coming up now without the fathers in the home, it allows them, because the mother's at work.
Yep.
You know, somebody's got to work.
Yeah.
You know, so when the mother isn't there, what are the kids doing? Who's watching over them? You know, who's giving them that structure? You know.
The one thing that I can say about this particular generation of young men that I work with, you know, they came up without fathers. I was like the father, you know, I come from a generation that fathered the generation of young men that's here today, that's now becoming fathers. And I tip my hat off to them because they love their kids. Like, I work with young men and they bring their kids into the space where we working with them at, and it's like they took a different route. The era in which I grew up with, we kind of resented our father's absence. And it kind of, you know, translated into our fathering skills or the lack of.
Right.
And those young men that we ended up, you know, conceiving into the next generation, they took a different approach. They resented the fact that we wasn't there, and they felt like they're not going to be that way
Towards
to
their
that.
kids.
And it's, I don't know how to explain it, but I see it. And I've worked with so many young men, from Iman, the organization that I worked with when I met you, to, you know, Chicago Cred. I'm still working with that same demographic of young men from 18 to 25, and they still becoming fathers early, but they haven't abandoned their kids the way the generation that I come from have pretty much abandoned. But also the generation that I come from is during the time of the mass incarceration era as well.
Right.
So it's a reason why we became absent. It was the conditions that was created in the streets in which we, you know, got sucked into, and they exploited it through the crack era, where they started, you know, just sending people to jail. And you talked about the gang structure. Although Chicago had this gang legacy, and we would never look at that as being a positive thing, but it was positive to the extent that with my generation, we were able to, you know, have this type of form of discipline. And they just started, you know, criminalizing young black men and sending us to prison at a record number. And we left our sons out here to basically figure out, you know, how to grow into their manhood on their own.
Right.
So
I try every time I get a chance to talk to females, because I believe they play a major role as well. You know, they tend to push the fathers away, make it hard for the fathers to spend time with the kids. I think it's definitely important that they have to understand that just time with their children is what is important, not the finance, you know, money and everything taken care. I mean, I understand that is, you know, some importance, but time, you know, kids need time. They need one-on-one. They need love. To me, love to kids is time. You know, it's not materialistic things. You know, your father ended up passing away. How did that affect you?
Can I address that one issue you
Sure.
talked about with the young women? These fathers not only had sons, they had daughters too. So when you look at the fact that the sons didn't have their fathers, the young women didn't have fathers. And men are the only resource that kids can have to look up to see what a man is like. And if you bring in that wrong example, you know, into young people's lives, they can only, you know, draw off what they know. And if you have a void there, you know, you have a generation growing up trying to define what it is that they have no understanding of. And because young people tend to, you know, gravitate to each other, they learn from each other. and you basically had the blind leading the blind. If you got a young lady, you know, just straight, you know, bashing her baby father in front of her kids, then that's the type of experience and knowledge that you're passing on to the kids, you know. But to the point of me losing my father passed away when he was a young man, 34 years old, and I was 15. And this actually took place 14 months before I ended up, you know.
Wait.
But yeah, I lost my father at that age.
Yeah. So right after your father passed away, you encountered a harassment with the police.
Yeah, I was leaving a girlfriend's house, and I think they had some guys had just got through fighting in the community, and I wasn't aware of what was going on. So I come to find out, it was a guy who called the police, who was a police. He was off-duty police officer. He was at home. He saw the disturbance. He called the police. And maybe about 20 minutes later, I'm walking home, and 2 white police officers pulled me over. And basically, they treated me like most police treat young black men walking in their own community out at night. You know, I got slapped up, abused, and basically, you know, thrown into a paddy wagon. And when the officer who made the complaint came and took a look to see who I was, he told the police, you know, you got the wrong guy. He had nothing to do with that. And basically told them that he was a police officer. He lived on this block. And eventually they let me go, and he told me he was gonna take me home. And on that ride home, he basically told me, you know, they was trying to get me to basically go along with them arresting me, sending me to the Adi home. And, you know, he said he wasn't gonna do that. So, you know, it was just that systematic way of how our community is policed, how young black men are criminalized just for being black.
Right.
And that's just the way they do it in our community. That's why we don't have trust with the police right now. Now,
that's when I cried in the book.
Okay.
That was one of the parts that I read that had me teary-eyed, because you actually explain it similar to what you said, but once you read the book, you know, you'll really be able to feel how you felt and what actually was actions that they had took against you and the things that they said to you.
Yeah.
That's what, you know, made me cry. And to think about the things that's going on today with the police brutality and everything. So yeah, that was really touching. I want to read a scripture out of the Bible. It's John 10:10. The thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. I come that you may have life. And that's God. He wants us to have life. And at that moment, you know, God was protecting you from something that could have really went worse than your mistake that you eventually end up doing. So would you like to share, after your father passed away, you were 16 years old, and then you ended up committing the biggest mistake of your life?
Yes.
You want to share?
Absolutely. You know, 16 years old, this was 14 months after my father had passed. I had an unfortunate encounter with a young man that resulted in me shooting him and him dying. But this young man happened to be the #1 basketball player in high school at the time in 1984. His name was Ben Wilson. I think because, you know, him being 17, me being 16, you know, we pretty much responded to each other, you know, without having the emotional tools of really dealing with a conflict that will allow us to step outside of, you know, these egos that we have, this false sense of what we think a man is, you know, one disrespectful word. And it's not so much that you can't get past that, but when you got people around witnessing it, then now you kind of measuring your manhood based off their perception of how they may see you and how you may respond to that. And it led to me, you know, feeling like I had to protect myself because Benji was like 6'8", and, you know, he was very aggressive. And I just felt in my mind that I couldn't allow him to take the gun from me and possibly use it against me. But I'm gonna also say this too. Being 16, you know, that was the mistake of shooting Ben. But the biggest mistake was me basically picking up that gun that morning, thinking that, you know, a gun could right or wrong. You know, you can't have the right mental capacity to be walking around with a gun thinking that you're gonna make the right decision. I always tell people, when you carry guns, you get gun problems, and things tend to go wrong real quick.
Right.
With a
I
gun.
agree.
Yeah.
Now, what interests me in the book is that you had other encounters where you would fight with your fists and always win.
Yeah.
And
well, I ain't gonna say I always win.
Okay, but I don't think in the book.
I got a winning record.
Okay. But you would beat the story that you told in the book. I said, do he ever lose? You know, but with this incident, you didn't, because you were actually trying to take up for your cousin on another incident.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. You know, honestly, I felt like Benji was the biggest person I've ever seen in my life. There was no way. I'm not stupid. I wasn't about to try to fight a giant.
Okay.
In my mind, I was 16 years old, and you know, right now I'm 5'10". I was 5'6". I was 135 pounds, and he was every bit of 6'8". I don't know how much Benji weighed, but he had on a trench coat, so he looked very imposing. And you know, honestly, I wasn't trying to be braggadocious about the encounter, the physical encounters I had. In no way I was the one that was always the quickest to fight. You know, I just got to a point in my life where at any point, if I felt like I had to defend myself, I wasn't scared to defend myself. But I wasn't walking around trying to, you know, clearly I was not the best fighter, you know, but I wasn't scared to fight if I needed to, you know, but I wasn't the type of person, I wasn't a fighter to that extent. So, you know, that was a situation I know I could not win if it turned physical. And like I said, when you carry guns, you get gun problems, and you tend to deal with situations different when you got a gun. And that situation, the way it played out was very different. Okay. Had it not been like that, or had I not had a gun, you know, that would have been a moment I would always talk about how probably bad it went for me. But unfortunately, it went bad for everybody.
Right. Absolutely. Because in your book, people were angry.
Absolutely.
They were upset. They literally wanted you to die.
You know, when you think about who Benji was and what he represented to the city of Chicago, he was the first young man to ever be ranked #1 in high school in the nation in Chicago. Simeon had just won a state championship the year before his junior year. You know, we come up in certain circumstances in Chicago where when you don't invest in people, the communities they come up in is neglected. You have these social and economic issues where you see all this deterioration. You know, you don't have a lot of hope or you think a lot of chances to really succeed other than selling drugs or maybe at that time playing basketball. A lot haven't changed. So by him being the one guy who everybody knew was gonna make it, he had, you know, the dreams of so many other people, you know, that they put on him to be taken away. That's very hard to deal with. Because I'm gonna be honest, had I not had that encounter with Benji, and I didn't know Benji, had he made it, I'm sure I would have been a big fan of Benji Wilson. To see him playing in the NBA coming from Chicago, South Side Chicago.
Of course. In your book, you tell us about how long it actually took the MLMs to get him. Also, what hospital they took him to didn't have a trauma center. I believe he could have lived.
Absolutely.
Had they got him to the correct trauma center. Picked him up on time.
It's real bad because when you think about the city of Chicago and the gun violence that we have experienced in Chicago, you know, there haven't been under 400 homicides since 1965 in Chicago. And primarily on the south and west side, so many young black people are being killed because of gun violence. And Benji was no exception, you know. We don't have no trauma centers they just opened up the University of Chicago as a trauma center only a few years ago. And for us suffering the type of gun violence that we suffer in our community, that shows you how much value they put on our life.
Right.
The premium of black life is not high when you think about the trauma that we experience on a daily basis in Chicago. This past weekend, the hottest weekend of the year so far, we had 55 people shot and 12 people killed. You know, and I hate to look at the news every Monday morning because I know it's going to be the same story.
Right.
So, you know, if we had that type of trauma going on in other communities, you'll have probably a trauma center on every corner, like you got a liquor store on every corner in our community. So it's, you know, it just shows you that still there's not a high premium on black life.
Right.
You know, and the conditions that leads to gun violence hasn't properly been addressed. You know, so.
Now, after that incident occurred, your adrenaline was rushing, you know, and you were really all over the place. We can say you were a kid. You was a baby. You was confused. You didn't know which way to go, where to turn, you know. And this moment is when I cried because you was lost, a lost soul. When you finally talked to your mother and she broke down, I broke down. Because I think about my nephews, you know, and because I don't have any boys, you know, so they're like my babies. And, you know, I dread for them to ever have to go through any of the things that you went through, to have to be locked up, anything of that nature, to even carry a gun. I don't want them to do any of those things, you know, because I put myself in her shoes as if I got that phone call either way around. Either my son got killed or my son committed a murder. Right. It's either way it go. It breaks you. You know, and at that moment, you know, she knew that you were in big trouble. And she couldn't save her baby.
And, you know, it's one of those situations where, you know, it was not only your child is being accused of this type of crime, but your child is being accused of the biggest crime that has ever hit Chicago.
Because she got hate letters.
Yeah, they posted, they published our address in the newspaper. They posted me and Omar's picture in the newspaper. I was 16, he was 15. You're not supposed to post juveniles pictures in the newspaper. Yeah, they posted our address where we live. The police literally from Gresham Station, at that time Gresham was on 85th and Green. It's now the 6th district on 78th and Halsted. But the police literally came to my house. The police from 111 came there, and they were fighting. They was about to fight, in my grandmother's front room. And they told my grandmother, if he don't turn himself in, we're gonna kill him when we catch him. So that's when Rush Ewing, who was a guy who used to help men, you know, help people that the police was looking for, turn themselves in so that they, you know, wouldn't be killed by the police in the street. But so I felt like, you know, those old Western movies where you see the signs, wanted dead or alive, I felt like my picture, you know, was basically on one of those warning signs.
Right.
I felt the real true weight and capacity of what that feel like. It wasn't a movie. It was my reality at that moment as a 16-year-old kid. And, you know, it was nothing I could do but just face the moment.
Right.
You know.
Of you committing a crime out of fear.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So they take you in. The thing that troubled me the most is the fact that they added Omar in with you. You know, and he didn't do anything.
He just stood
He
in
was
the
just
grass.
there.
Yeah. You know, the police had basically concocted this fabrication that we tried to rob Benji in order to, you know, have
A motive.
murder charges.
Right. Yeah.
Pinned on us. So, you know, because had that not been the case, then I think I couldn't have been charged no more than with a manslaughter, which means I probably would have only did anywhere from 7 to 14 years. But with a first-degree murder charge, you know, that was bare minimum 20 and the max 40.
Right.
And as it turned out, I got the max 40 years.
Because you was praying for Benji to make it.
I mean, you know, when you ask me about love, right, and the many ways we can love, empathy is love.
Yep.
Understanding people's humanity.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to find myself fighting for my life because I've been shot in an unfortunate confrontation. And me being on the other end of that, you know, I didn't want to see him die.
Right.
You know, I didn't care who he was in terms of, you know, his star power, the fact that he was the number. I didn't even know who he was until I started seeing it on the news. You know, and then my cousin was like, man, this is who this is. And Erica came like, and it's like, that didn't matter. Like, I didn't want to see him die. And people don't understand this. Like, even right now to the day, you know, I live with Benji every day because I know, you know, I'm a true believer that, I may still have to answer for that, you know. So that's still, you know, I did forgive myself because I had to, but at the same time, I understand the reality of what I did, you know. We don't choose to be born, we don't choose to live, but we've been granted life. We was born into this world. And, you know, I was no different from Benji. He was born into this world.
And we all images of God.
And I'm responsible for him not being in this world. So that's, you know, that's my burden, you know. And that's why I do the work that I do, because I want to make sure that young men coming up the same way I came up can learn from my mistake. And if I can help them think their way, you know, out of these moments that they find themselves thinking that they have to, you know, shoot somebody to protect themselves, then they can make the right decision. And I can save lives, as many lives as I can. I can't never make up for that one. I'm responsible for not being here, but it's my mission to try to save as many lives as I can.
I believe and know that God has forgiven you for that, and that he's working through you to show yourself approved and to show that you have changed. And, you know, you made a mistake. You did something, and we all fall short of the glory. But who are we to judge? You know, we're going to do a part 2 with Billy. With Mr. Billy Moore, because there's more questions to ask, and the book is amazing. So we'll come back with you with a part 2. Thank you for tuning in with Four at the Table, and stay full in the spirit.